the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. My name is Brian Wallace, and I am the MS Michigan Man 64. The MS Michigan Man 64 podcast is about chronic disease awareness. I have had multiple sclerosis for the last 27 years. It's an invisible chronic disease that I've been battling for half of my life. I want to share with you what it is like living with the chronic disease from my experiences and the experiences of other chronic disease warriors. We can fight to have a voice to those that want to listen. Together, we can motivate and educate. Hi, welcome to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. Today I am sitting down with Doug. He is in the field of architecture, a draftsman. He's from the state of Indiana, and he was just recently diagnosed in 2022, but he has presented symptoms for quite a long time before that. Please welcome Doug. How are you doing today, Doug?
I'm doing good, Brian. How are you doing?
I am doing all right, my friend. So, Doug, you were diagnosed in 2022 during COVID, but you said that you had told me that you were presenting symptoms, as far back as 2005, 2006. Can you kind of like explain your journey with getting your diagnosis and, how you were having symptoms and you weren't even diagnosed and how that all went?
So, early 2006, I was having some issues with some tingling in my hands and a little in my feet. And then I was having vision struggles where it was kind of like a blurry issue. I was having floaters kind of running through my eyesight. And so I made my way into the regular doctor's office, and he kind of did his evaluations and exams, and then didn't really have an answer for the numb tingling sensations, but gave me a referral to ophthalmology for my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Got into his office, and he super dilated my eyes and kind of went on a deep dive in terms of looking at that space. And
Mm-hmm.
he had noticed an optic neuritis. And then he quickly told me that that was kind of an early designating sign for MS, and then gave me the referral to neurology.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Okay.
get into neurology and kind of met with them. He did a lot of kind of electrode tests, kind of did some measurements on the brain, and kind of ran his little prong onto some various areas, and did a
Yeah.
lot of what seemed like odd little tests, but to him they
Yeah.
were telling him where the nerves were kind of acting up and misacting. And then
Mm-hmm.
he scheduled for an MRI, but initially it was just for the brain. And
Okay.
so he went through there, and they noticed some activities. And then we went on a little farther, kind of spread this over a couple of years really. And then
Mm-hmm.
in '07 was a second set of scans that included a spinal scan. And
Okay.
there was a little more activity that was concerning in the brain, but there was nothing presenting down the spine. And at that point, they wanted to do a spinal tap to test for the O bands.
Right.
At that point, needles were not my friend. Like, my wife had an epidural with our children, and my only job was to hold her shoulders and be supportive for her. And the thought of what they were doing to her made me queasy, and I had to exit out of the room. And
Yeah.
so him
Hey.
telling me they're going to do a spinal tap, which is closely similar to an epidural, but not quite, but it's still a big
Right.
old needle getting shoved in your back.
Right.
I kind of walked away. My vision had kind of cleared up a little bit. The numbness and tingling was still around, but
Mm-hmm.
my perception, it wasn't impacting me enough to be concerned. And
Okay.
so I fully turned the shoulder and walked out of his office. I still got the red envelope that had treatments and medication options, which was 4 injectable shots, and was kinda told to look those over. But
Yeah.
in essence, I turned away and took off.
So this is 2007, 2008, Doug.
Yeah.
And you're still not diagnosed, and you're still pushing along, and you're married, and you have kids. And how did that affect your life? I mean, how did you like? I mean, it had to be like just on your mind. Like, what? There's something wrong. There's something wrong. How did you deal with that in your head?
It was something that sat on the back of my mind. I
Mm-hmm.
was aware of it, that I knew there was a concern for it, but it wasn't enough of a concern to give it the full attention. Um,
Okay.
kind of moved on. So it was something
Yeah.
my wife, we started dating in like fall of '99 as sophomores in high school, and
Mm-hmm.
we were married in 2004 and started having kids in '05, '07, and '08.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other bigger decision that was back early 2000s when healthcare was very predominantly a pre-existing condition relationship.
Sure. Sure.
And so the other aspect of turning and walking away was
You don't want the
I don't want to have
diagnosis.
that label. And so I
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
turned and
Yeah.
walked away
You ran
from it.
away. Yeah, you
Um,
ran away from it, sure.
but going through, the early 2010s, it sat on the back of my mind like I'm aware of kind of what could be happening, but
Mhm.
in my thought process, nothing was happening. In
Yeah.
doing the drafting and stuff, there were multiple clients that I met with that had our RMS that were looking to build a house for if their disease progressed. So that way they wouldn't have a hallway they couldn't get down because of restrictions or having to redesign their entire house to make it work
Mhm.
for them. They wanted to preemptively have something that was already adapted.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that kind of distorted my view on, the disease,
Yeah.
the reality to it. So
Yeah.
to me, there were, people living everyday lives that if they didn't tell you, you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
and that was kind of my reality. There was one draftsman that worked in the industry that I was doing lumber construction in that he had MS and he continued to
Mhm.
do his drawing work, but then toward the later years of his life, so when he got 60, 70 years old, that was, put to a chair, mobility issues, and then actually started to pull himself kind of out of the working scene. But
Yeah.
it wasn't the reality to it still wasn't enough to be concerning.
Yeah.
In those times, 2010 plus, my kids were older kids, young teenagers, actively involved in sports like baseball and basketball, and I was coach dad.
Yeah.
I was active with
S
them, running around with them, and still pushing forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're basically you're living a normal life, but you still, you are having little symptoms here and there that you but you're just living your life. So where is the point in time where it got to the point where you like said, you know what? No, there's like I gotta go and we gotta figure this out. And so where how did that get to that point?
So that happened fall of 2022. And but before we get there, we get to 2018, 19, 20, 21. I
Hmm.
was consistently in the doctor's office typically every spring for something strange happening, which individually isn't a big red flag, but looking back now, we're
Yeah.
all precursors. Like I was in
Yeah.
for random unexplained fatigue. I was in for,
Yeah.
muscle weaknesses in my legs. I was in for vision issues with my eyes. And so I would go to the optometrist and he gave me a very an overpriced reading glasses prescription.
Mhm.
That when the glasses came in, they didn't work. Like my vision wasn't a problem again after 2 weeks. And so
Okay.
fought with that. But every year I was in the doctor's office for something. But then we get to 22 in the fall, I was coaching bowling with my kids and I was standing in a room with the coaches meeting and my leg completely gave out, kind of fell into a wall and kind of had
Mhm.
to restabilize myself.
Yeah.
And then started having some minor issues happening where my singling sensations in my hands turned into more of like a full numbness sensation. It was kind of like sitting on the toilet for too long, your legs go to sleep. It was
Yeah.
that sensation, but it was without the stinging or the pain.
Yeah.
And so I was still living with it, but it got stronger. Um,
Mhm.
I was taking a shower one evening, and we live in a house with old plumbing, so you turn the sink water on and you lose hot water in the shower. And so I'm taking a shower, and all of a sudden, it felt dull on my chest, and then went back to my arm. But I yelled out the window, and I was like, "Hey, someone get off of the sink. I'm taking a shower." And my wife had yelled back. She's like, "There's no one in the kitchen." And I'm like, "Well, that's kind of weird."
Yeah.
And she's like, I was like, I put the water on my right shoulder and it feels hot. I put the water on my left shoulder, it feels hot. I put the water on my chest and it's like a dull
Yeah.
sensation. And I was like, our water heater doesn't work that
Yeah.
fast.
Right.
And so that led me back into the doctor's office, for the regular doctor's office, and he tried to order an MRI, but insurance wouldn't allow it because he's a general doctor and there's no need for that. And so
Yeah.
he finally gave me the referral to neurology. And so I went
Mhm.
into his office and was kind of going through his questions and answers and symptoms. But I went in, I had an Excel spreadsheet of all the little things that I was experiencing. When I first noticed it, when I noticed it went away, and what all was going on. And so
Mhm.
it was like a page and a half document of a timeline of all these little things that went on,
Yeah.
going back to 2018 where the doctor's office visits showed up.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so he was looking through it and was noticing kind of like the trend of stuff. And so he ordered just a brain MRI the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Tuesday, Wednesday before Thanksgiving in 22, and got the radiologist report back on my chart system and
Mhm.
was reading through it. At that point, I was hiding in the background on TikTok because my kids used it and I wanted to know what they were being exposed to. And then being there, I quickly found there were other users on TikTok talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think of my friend Paige that was very adamant about sharing her wisdom and experience and mythology about it.
Mhm.
But was picking up on the keywords that would show up on the radiologist report. And so I was reading mine and I was seeing those same keywords.
Yeah.
So in my head, knowing my history from the start to now that MS was the possibility, it kind of settled in that diagnosis was coming. So the start of December was the official meeting with the neurologist after the scans, and it completed the McDonald criteria of dissemination in space and time, advancement of activities, and so he had the full official diagnosis at that point.
Yeah.
And
That's a long path, man. That, that's a long path to diagnosis, Doug. I couldn't even imagine going through that. I mean, I'm a little bit different. I went 10 months on my diagnosis. I couldn't imagine going through that path. So, what was it like for you from a mental standpoint after you finally got the diagnosis officially that you had multiple sclerosis?
It was still hard. Like, I had gone all that time halfway aware of what it may be. But actually hearing the words, "You have MS," it hits hard. Like I said, that with that diagnosis, I realized that I was running out of fear of the
Yeah,
unknown, fear of needles for the majority of it, but I didn't like that. And at the
yeah,
time when it first started, and probably similarly for you, when it first started, there wasn't a conversation, there wasn't awareness, there wasn't anything being talked about to remove that cloud
that
of
fear.
unknown.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I started like the second week of December, kind of sharing my experience, sharing my story. Like, you go to my very first video on TikTok and you see that raw emotion. And then you watch
yeah.
2 weeks of sharing, or a month of sharing, and you notice my dealing, my oh, what's the word I want to say? My acceptance of the disease
Hmm.
and what was going on.
Yeah,
But that was my initial goal. Is like, I ran from the unknown because I didn't know. And so
yeah.
I wanted to share my experience, that maybe it would help somebody else along the way.
And that is so important, Doug. I'm the same way as you. I mean, when I got diagnosed back in '97, I mean, that was before the internet. So there was actually nothing for me to turn to like try to figure out what this disease was even all about. I wish that they had tools like they have now, like TikTok or even Facebook. There's Facebook MS groups, and there's just so much more information on the internet, and it's sad that you have to go online to learn about something, and it's not really discussed in society because they don't want nobody wants to talk about chronic diseases. It's kind of frustrating.
And that so going through December of 22, I learned the hard way what a pseudo relapse was.
Mm,
Because I started to, when I was active on a bowling night, was having vision and clarity and cognitive struggles as the night progressed. And so one of the people I designed a house for that had MS became a close, confidant for what I was going through. And so I had called her and was like, "Hey, yada yada yada," and she had kind of helped explain and clarify the process, um,
hmm
and in terms of what that could be. But it still didn't keep me from pestering my neurologist about this, that, and the other. And it got to the point where I was either more than he wanted to handle, or my struggles were more than what he had the ability to help with. And so I got the referral in January to go to an MS specialist.
hmm
And so going up there and meeting with a specialist, still go through the same line of questioning and tests and clarity, because no neurologist trusts what the other one says. So they individually kind of prove for themselves. But he ordered another brain scan and a full spine scan. And partway because I was 3 weeks on medication, so he wanted to see what that was doing as well. But that spinal scan from all the way in 2007 was clear. There wasn't any activity on my spine. So
hmm
they ran through theirs, and I'm thinking it's at least 20, 24 lesions on my brain. But the
hmm
shocker was I have 12 lesions on my spine.
yeah.
And what I've since learned, where spinal lesions are kind of what affects your ability and movement, and brainal lesions affect your kind of cognitive and mental functions.
Mhm.
But all this time, that was the bigger oh shit moment, because
Yeah.
I had gone from '07, '08 not thinking anything was going on, not thinking anything was actively progressing or moving,
Right.
to finding out so many years later that I had damage and lesions and progression. I've
Yeah.
since gone through and roughly associated those lesion points to, like, this chord affects this detail, this chord affects this detail. Like, when you have a spinal injury, the farther down you go, the more that it affects, or and kind of works down, but roughly associated my lesions to my struggles.
Right.
And
Yeah.
but in knowing that, there's a whole lot of more people in the community that have, less lesions that are more of an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the really, I guess, kind of amazing thing about this disease is that, I hear that a lot from other people that have this disease. They say they got to count on how many lesions they have on their brain or their spine, but they're fully functional. I mean, they're still walking around, they're still
Mhm.
cognitively fine. And then you have people that say, I only have a couple of lesions and they're already in a wheelchair. I don't even think I don't even think science understands, which ones can actually take you out because I honestly, I don't even know how many lesions I have on my brain. A doctor quite a few years ago, when I asked that question to him, he said, "What does it matter, Brian? You're still up and moving and walking around and everything's good. It doesn't matter if you have one or a thousand, just keep on doing what you're doing."
So summer of 23, I was still having vision problems that were directly related to my activity. Like, I would do certain activities and my vision would fall away. Like bowling night, the screen starts
Hmm.
clear and I can read the score, but at the end of the night,
Yeah.
I can't. I have to
Yeah.
stand 3 feet away from the screen to read it, and then a couple hours later, it kind of opens up. Well, I went to a neuro ophthalmologist, and the most troubling news you ever get is when he sees two lesions on your optic nerves and says, "Yeah, there's damages here, but it healed well." And
Yeah.
that was just a big mind game. It's like, what's it mean it healed well? It's like, it doesn't really heal, but kind of gave some understanding as to why. It's like, I know my vision's not going to be perfect moving forward, but we're at a start point as to what to watch.
Yeah, yeah, and my I have the optic neuritis too, and that is actually one of my biggest problems. Are my eyes. I have to, I see double if I don't have prism in my lenses. I can't see straight, and all that, and that's been my one of my biggest problems with my disease. The whole from beginning to end was my eyes were my first symptom that started this thing, and my eyes are still my symptom that I have a lot of issues with.
But numbness in my hands and feet were the first the first symptom noticed, and that's still here today. Like,
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
those years where I'm not thinking anything's happened, that was a constant situation. My wife had asked, "Is like, what's that feel like?" And I'm like, "Well, imagine you're running a weed eater or a chainsaw all day, and your hands get tingly from the vibration of the tool." And it's like, my hands
Mhm.
always feel like that, even when I don't touch the machinery.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it gets into kind of the mindset to it, in terms of, I never really focused on how bad things actually were. Like, I always kind
Mhm.
of looked past the bad and found the positive way around it, in
Yeah.
that sense. It's
Yeah.
I can't do this right now, but we can do that.
Yeah.
And that's been the biggest factor in my life. Like, I get a cold or I get a sickness, I don't run to the doctor's office and say, "Give me something to make this go away."
Mhm.
I'll bear down for a couple of days and kind of let the cold run its course and carry on with life. And then it kind of transitioned into the MS. My friend that has been the confidant for a couple of years now, had kind of given me the ins and out of steroid treatments. And her response was, if it's something that's affecting your vision or affecting your ability to move, steroids are a have to situation. But if it's something that you can bear with or live with, the only thing steroids are going to do is kind of upset your bodily system and just quicken the process. Doesn't make it any better or any worse, but it just kind of makes the healing process a little faster. And so she was like, if you can avoid,
Right, right, right.
if you can live with it, avoid the steroids aspect, because her experience with steroids wasn't a positive situation, and so that was kind of
Yeah.
her aspect. And so so it was about a month ago. It was Sunday before Christmas, and today we're sitting right at the end of January. I started to have a weakness in my hip, to where I would stand up and I would kind of feel like the muscle was empty, like there was nothing there. And then when we were doing Christmas cleanup after Christmas, I was moving a wheelbarrow with rocks and weights and stuff. I noticed that weakness, like it was actually muscle weakness that it turned into. Um,
Mhm.
so I gave it 10 days and then just sent a message to my specialist and it's like, hey, I've been dealing with this for 10 days now, just to let you
Yeah.
know. It's
What was
just
the
hey, it's
response you got?
FYI.
What was the response? What kind of response did you get?
Honestly, it was a this message was forwarded to the doctor. Like he is yet to give any response. But
Oh,
I
wow.
I say that, but I sent the message to him as FYI. Just so
Yeah.
you know, this is going on.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
then here in the last week, that same weakness feeling has kind of transferred into my left thigh. And so when I'm doing a bowling on Tuesdays, it affects my approach. Like it causes me to stumble a little more, but it's actual weakness that comes off on that muscle. And at this point, I'm probably going to give it another, probably the end of the month, send him another email with kind of like an update, because the other
yeah.
issue has been, there's officially a word for it, but in my left ankle, I've had the feeling of, usually in the evening after I'm settling down, my ankle just burns.
I
It's just a burning sensation. Um,
Yeah, I have that too, Doug, and I get that in my ankles, and they tell me they call it neuropathy. They're
yeah,
like, that's the neuropathy from the MS, nerve damage, blah blah blah. They give
yeah,
me Lyrica for it. It doesn't really help. Takes a little bit of the edge off, but yeah, that's just something that I had to learn to live with, which kind of sucks about MS. But
and that's something that I've lived with for probably 9 months. I think it was about midsummer, like July, August, when I first noticed it happening on my ankle. But here in the last week, it's moved from my ankle up to about my knee section. And at night, it causes a lot of discomfort, because if my other leg touches that skin, it just kind of ex- exaggerates
in,
exaggerates the feeling,
intensifies it. Yeah,
intensifies
it
it. So
intensifies.
usually at
Yeah,
night, I'm kind of shifting and rolling between my legs, kind of shifting apart from each other to not be a distraction while I sleep. So
yeah,
here in the next week or so, I'm probably going to send another message to him that, hey, this is still going on. It's progressed to here. This has progressed to there, and I'll see you in a month, because I see him
yeah.
like start of March. Um,
Gotcha.
and so,
What kind of DMT? What kind of DMT did they put you on, Doug?
because I still hate needles, and because of the advancement of medicine over 20 years, I take a Baggio, a little pill that I take every day.
Okay.
And so far, I say so far, it's done its work in keeping me stable and inactive. Like from
Mm,
all of my scans for the last 2 years has been a kind of an inactive reading. Um, but I don't think what I'm currently dealing with for the last 6 weeks is I don't think it's a relapse. I think it's
yeah.
just I think it's progression in a sense, or it's just like, it's cold season, cold and sickness season, so I think it's just kind of messing with my with my body and symptoms, but I would not be surprised with my conversations in March with the specialist if it comes up about changing DMTs.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
at this point, I wouldn't be surprised by it, but
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily expecting that. But
You know,
unlike
for me, Doug, every time I've switched DMTs, I've been on about six of them. It's always been my choice. I mean, the neurologist has never said, "I'm taking you off this drug." He's always said, "What do you think? What do you think of switching your DMT?" So it's going to be your choice.
and that's
Um,
that's that's the messed up part with that's the messed up part with what's going on here. None of us are experts in how these medications work or what these medications do, but rather than the doctor saying, "Well, based on kind of what you're experiencing, I think this direction is gonna be the better option." It's a, "Here's 4 choices, kind of let me know what your thoughts are."
yeah,
And
I
I've
know.
never
Like,
really agreed with that.
and I'm just trying to think back of like my DMT switches. My last one, I went from Gilenia to Mavenclad. That was all because of insurance, so I'm not even going to count that one. Well, I went from my first. Let's go back to my first one. I started on Copaxone, and I had a really bad crash. And and when I went into my neurologist, he actually said, "Brian, we're gonna switch you. Do you think you want to switch?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I go, I yeah, I go, "I don't want to be get any worse." And at that time, Tasabri was just coming out, so I switched over to Tasabri.
Now,
But I didn't even know what. But I
did that come by way of MRI scans in terms of that decision as well?
No, no, that was actually my first neurologist, Dr. Joe Hanna. He's down in South Carolina now. But when he was my neurologist, I was on Copaxone for, like I said, my first 15 years, did my shot every day. And then I had a really bad flare up. He didn't even bother with any MRIs. I came in to his office, did my 5-day infusion, Medrol, and he said, "Yeah, Brian, we're gonna get you on another DMT."
And the steroids have been a treatment course that I've not experienced.
And my biggest problem with the infusion is insomnia. Like I'll be awake, like literally, I would be awake for 36 hours straight. Sometimes that was the biggest, I'd say, bitch that I would have about the Medrol, but it was definitely a huge boost in every one of my treatments. Like if it was my vision or if it was my legs, it jacked me up that I came back pretty close to my baseline every time. um so I don't have anything bad about the Medrol treatments. I know some people have had bad allergic reactions to it. They give them Benadryl beforehand, but I fortunately have never had any bad reactions to Medrol. So let's talk. I'm just going to switch angles a little bit. And, MS is a very frustrating disease, and I can talk all day long about the frustrating parts of it. But if there's anything that good out of what this diagnosis has given you, what would you give like a positive thing on your MS diagnosis, Doug?
That's hard. The positive aspect is it's made me a lot more compassionate to what people are dealing with in terms of I was one of those people that would see you park in a handicap spot and would just kind of grumble under my breath and judge you because you didn't look like you needed to be there.
Yeah,
And that has since changed in terms of understanding the invisible aspect of sicknesses and struggles. I mean,
yeah.
I don't have a placard nor struggles that affect me in that way, which is a blessing in itself. But I still park close to the shopping cart coral, and I'll grab a shopping cart as I'm walking into a store, whether I need it or not. I'm pushing it as
There you
a
go.
balance
There
assistance,
you go.
but
Yeah.
there's not judging a book by its cover. Like there are a lot of things that society deal with that you're not privy to, that you don't know about. And so I've been a lot more compassionate on that aspect to it.
And I will agree with you 1000% on that. I have found in my 27 years, I have so much more compassion. And that's one of the things that I thank MS for. It gave me that, you know what, you don't understand what people are going through. So don't judge them, just kind of like, just let it be. And it's sad that it took MS to give me that attitude. I wish I had it a lot earlier, but I'm grateful that it did because it made me way more aware about what's going on around me and just like understanding other people's struggles.
Well, and the struggles are a part of it. Um, and early on, cognitive struggles were a big deal. Like
Hmm.
I used to be a multitasking genius. Like I could have
Yeah.
12 projects thrown up in the air and all the balls stayed up and doing what I need. And then the cognitive decline that is set in relatively quickly has caused me to modify the way that I do things in terms of work and life. Like I got
Hmm.
official diagnosis there toward the end of COVID. So everything was drive through based, everything was drive up based, everything was, take the personal interaction out of it. So
Hmm.
we would eat fast food because it was just a lot easier than dealing with the grocery store. And
Right.
typically the kids are all ordering the same thing every time. They'll switch from nuggets to burger or, back and forth. But it hit me when I went through the drive through and the lady couldn't understand what I was saying. And so I had to repeat something. And then my
Hmm.
brain just shut down. Like I couldn't cognitively comprehend what was going on. And it turned into where my wife would send me a text message of the exact order, and I would start from the
Hmm.
top and read it all the way down, and if something happened in the middle of that process, I started over from the beginning.
Yeah.
And in terms of work life, I've got to do a job that takes 20 steps,
Right.
and it was getting to where if I would get up from my desk, I would walk somewhere else, I would get distracted with a phone call, I would come back, and I would skip a step, and so I'd have an error or an issue on a project, and I started having to kind of look at the job, write down every step that I needed to do, and then cross it off as I get finished. And then, so now whenever I have an issue or a problem, I'll go back through my 5 subject notebook, find my notes for that project, and I usually forget a step.
I love that you use that. I mean, if you haven't a problem that MS is giving you, you got to figure it out. I always say, MSers figure shit out, and you struggle with the cognitive thing. I do too. So I one of my tools that I use is I text myself. I'll send myself a text just to remind myself to do something then tomorrow or next week that I have to do it. I don't use the calendar, and to me it's just not it's not as effective, so I just like using the text thing. you're using a spiral bound notebook. It works for you, and that's the part about the MSers that I love is that everybody, you have your problems, but we always figure it out how to get around it. And that's the way we're wired, you know?
I live and die by my notebook and my calendar. Like, if I don't put an appointment in my calendar, I will legitimately forget it.
Yeah.
My text
Yeah.
messages, I learned how to schedule a text message. So I can, if I need to make a phone call, I'll be like, call so and so, and I'll schedule it for 9 o'clock the next day. And then at
Yeah.
9 o'clock,
Love
I
it.
get a text message and they're like, hey, I got to call this guy.
I love it. And that's my point, Doug. I mean, we figure it out, and it. You've been dealing with this for almost 20 years now. Or going out just about 20 years, but you've been diagnosed for a few. But you've been figuring it out for 20 years. I mean, even back when before you were diagnosed, you were still figuring out how to get the workarounds, how to deal with manage this disease, and that's one of the things that I really hope that people understand is that just because you got diagnosed with this disease, you're not done. You can still be very productive. You can still do the things that you want to do. You just got to figure out how to do them a little bit differently.
Yeah. And
Doug, I
that's,
really I really appreciate you coming on with me and sharing your story today. Is there anything else that you want to tell anybody that is out there that's dealing, in similar situations that we're dealing with? They're just newly trying to figure this out. What would your message be to them as far as battling this disease?
it would be to find the positive spin on, whatever it is you're struggling. I say that not having dealt with, major movement issues, or major eye loss issues, or some of the more dramatic aspects
Yeah,
of it. But with the struggles that I do have, if I don't think about it, I forget about it. It's
right.
like tendonitis was a big issue. And I was driving with my son last night because he was having some vibration in his trucks, and he was describing a noise that it was making, and I wasn't hearing it because the tendonitis that I have in my ears, I think, was matching the frequency of the noise he was hearing. And so I was like, I'm not saying you're not hearing something, but I'm saying I can't hear, I
Yeah,
don't hear what you're hearing. And I think that
yeah,
was the kind of the tendonitis matching, the frequency of the noise. But that's something
yeah,
that I've lived with for many years, of the constant kind of ringing noise in the ear. And even though it's there constantly, half the day I don't notice it because I'm not paying attention to it. Not meaning it went away. It
yeah,
just, I don't give it its attention. And
yeah,
with as much as you can, looking past the struggle, is kind of the
yeah,
the key to your mentality. Because if you're going to sit and focus on the cannots minute after minute, day after day, it's going to be a depressing, struggle. But
yeah,
focusing on
yeah.
what you can
Yeah.
do in a different way.
I love it, Doug. It's hard to do, but I love you got to find the positives in this disease. If it takes away your ability to walk, but you still have a voice, be happy and use your voice. If you lose your voice, but you can still walk, be happy and use your legs. I mean, you're still going to have things that are still very usable, and just take advantage of what you can do.
Well, even at that, there are those in the community here on TikTok that have had major mobility struggles, and through physical therapy, through kind of continuing daily to push through it, have regained some of that
Hmm.
function, have regained that mobility, in a sense. Not perfect like it was, but better than
Yeah.
not being there.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, you can't quit. You can't quit with this disease. It doesn't matter what it does to you. You got to get up, dust yourself off, and you got to keep on fighting. And that's what I like about you, Doug. I mean, you've been, like I said, you've been battling this for almost 20 years, and I see no quit in you. You are going to take whatever this disease dishes out to you, fuck MS, and you just keep on moving. And I love that about you. Um, I want to thank everybody for joining me in, and I also want to thank Doug for being a part and helping me spread awareness about what this disease is like. Please follow the podcast, hit the follow subscribe button. If you have any kind of questions for me or Doug, put it in the comments section, and I will check you out next time on the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. You all have a great day.